This is a movement at a place when the country is still in shock, absorbing what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 means for segregation, for employment, for equal employment, for women, all these things. And here this movement is way out in the vanguard on a new movement for Voting Rights Act, divided internally. There's a plan to march from Selma to Montgomery. And John Lewis stayed up all night with his people about whether or not to march. John, remember that moment for us a little bit.
So thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
I want to go back a little bit, Tally, if I might.
All right.
If I might. You may recall, maybe you were just a little bit too young. Maybe not. When I spoke at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, 47 years ago, when I was working on my speech, I was reading a copy of the New York Times, and I saw a group of black women in Southern Africa carrying signs saying, "One man, one vote." So in my March on Washington speech, I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. It must be ours." That became the rallying cry for the young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We put that slogan, "One man, one vote," on our letterhead, on the back of the envelopes, and all of the writings that publications that we sent out. And so we conferred in Atlanta all night, whether we should march or not. And I made the decision that I was a native of Alabama. I've been arrested in jail and met the people in Selma. They want to march, I'm going to go there and march with them. And 3 of the SNCC staffers, including myself, went there. And the rest is history.
But I wanted to ask you, during that period when you had the big marches and the final march into Montgomery, there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in the movement, in the Congress people about what kind of bill would be written. The judge, whether judge would allow this march to take place with the executive branch about what kind of job, what kind of bill would be introduced. Were you aware of, I mean, the movement is not just about demonstrations and holding the movement together, although that was really hard to do. It's also about, you know, what's your relationship with the executive branch and the judiciary. You're really getting into historic politics as well as a movement then. What's your memory of that kind of thing?
Well, I think those of us on the front line spend a great deal of our time dealing with the judiciary, especially the Department of Justice, but also with Judge Johnson, Frank M. Johnson, who had issued an order, an injunction saying that we could not march, and we had to go into federal court, into the district court there in Montgomery. And I remember being there and testifying. I had been there once before in 1961 during the Freedom Ride, and Judge Johnson was very progressive, very progressive. He had been appointed to the bench at a very young age by President Eisenhower. He was one of these progressive Republicans from northern Alabama. And I remember when John Doerr from the Civil Rights Division and others had subpoenaed the film footage of CBS of when we were being beaten, and they showed it in the courtroom. And Judge Johnson, we had asked, this when we were getting permission to march, or getting the order to march. And Judge Johnson stood up after seeing that film footage, shook his robe, and recessed the court. And you knew then, you can just tell by his demeanor, he didn't like it.
No.
And he came back and gave us everything that we had asked for, that we could walk in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion. He said, in effect, that we had a right to march. And
through Lowndes County.
Through Lowndes County. Now, Lowndes County, Alabama is located, it's between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American. There was not a single registered African American voter in the county.
Not one.
Not one. and we had to march through that county. But President Johnson had invited Governor Wallace to come to Washington, meet with him at the White House, to try to get assurance that he would be able to protect us. He could not assure the president. So on March 15th, 8 days after Bloody Sunday, Lyndon Johnson, President Lyndon Johnson, made one of the most meaningful speeches that any American president, I think, you may disagree with me, Taylor, had made in modern time on the whole question of voting rights, or civil rights. He started that speech off that night by saying, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy." To paraphrase what Lyndon Johnson said, he said, "At time, history, and fate meet in a single place in man's unending search for freedom. So it was more than a century ago at Lexington and at Concord. So it was at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama." He condemned the violence in Selma. He introduced the Voting Rights Act, and before he concluded that speech, President Johnson said, "And we shall overcome." I was in the room with Dr. King at a local family home in Selma. I looked at him. Tears came down his face. He started crying, and we all cried. To hear Lyndon Johnson use the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement, he said, "And we shall overcome." Dr. King said then, "We will make it from Selma. The Voting Rights Act will be passed." And he was right.
The president's mentor and patron, Senator Russell from Georgia, was on the floor that day, and when he said "we shall overcome," he had a different stunned reply. All he said was, "God damn." I guess we're not on television, that's all right, but it was a stunning moment. Another one from behind the scenes is that when Judge Johnson was considering privately what kind of order to grant protecting the Voting Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, after John's testimony, Dr. King, he felt that he had the dignity of the judicial system to uphold, because his greatest nightmare was that he would have an order and that Governor Wallace would defy it and come in and beat the people on the march, and it would make him look ridiculous. So he called the acting Attorney General of the United States, Nicholas Katzenbach, and said, "If I issue an order protecting this, or I want assurances that that you will enforce it, that if Wallace doesn't protect him, that you will." And Katzenbach said, "Yes, Your Honor, I am sure that I will do everything I can." And the judge said to Katzenbach, "I don't give a damn what you think. I want to know what the President of the United States is going to do, and I want his assurance that he will protect these markers." So on a number of different occasions and moments, there were tests for lots of actors in this thing, in all three branches of government and the movement. So historically, to me, what's so significant about this is that it brings together an aroused citizenry with a responsive government. And this organization here, as I understand it, was formed in part out of the constitutional and voting issues growing out of the 2000 election.
Taylor, I think we got to fight on all fronts, both fronts. Preserve what we have, but strengthen it.
Right.
Broaden it. Don't be afraid.
Thank you.
This is the 21st century. With the technology that we have, we should be able to do better as a nation and as a people.